Hello and welcome again to As We May Think. This is going to be a very different episode than the ones I've recorded thus far, or some of the ones I'm planning to record. Thus far, I've kind of focused on either things I think everybody should know or little bits of tech that I think are really neat, like the if this, then that thing. And I'm going to be doing a mentoring show. However, what I haven't done is kind of live coding. In fact, I've never done that ever. So this is going to be a fairly significant change for me to do live coding. I don't normally code with people looking over my shoulder, so to speak. And I guess technically it's not really live. I can edit it if I absolutely have to, but I'm going to try and not do that. I'm going to try and see if I can just code, and all the mistakes that I make and the boneheaded stuff that I do, you're going to get to see it the way I get to see it. We're going to see what that's like. Anyway, the project that I'm planning to start first is one called ScorePad. I do a lot of board game playing. It's a big deal for me. It's my main hobby. And I use an app called ScoreKeeper XL, I believe is the actual name of it. And I'll try to insert some video right here to show you what ScoreKeeper looks like on the iPad. Sorry, on the iOS, like my phone. We use it when we play sometimes, and it's good. It's got, in fact, one feature that I'm definitely going to rip off, but it doesn't really fit well for how people, in my experience, really score when they're sitting around a table around with each other playing a board game. Often, scorekeeping is kind of a group activity. It's not just left to one person to keep the score for everybody. Often, I may keep score while it's your turn, and then somebody else keeps score, and we just kind of all watch each other to make sure that the score is kept up to date. And in some games, in fact, scorekeeping is actually done on a per player basis, and I may have a score that I'm keeping track of, and you've got a score you're keeping track of, and I can see that you're playing and I'm playing, but the scores aren't revealed until the very end of the game. So I'm not going to necessarily enable all those abilities from the get-go, but these are things I kind of want to work my way up to. And at a minimum, I want to have a web app where you and I can be on the same score sheet, and I can make changes to it, you can make changes to it, and then whenever it syncs up, hopefully it will end up with the same score for both of us. With that in mind, I see this app as being interesting to you, even if you don't play board games, for two reasons. The first one is every app needs a starting point. It needs to have some kind of build process, maybe not a lot of one, but it needs something typically. It needs to be deployed somewhere. It needs to have certain tech. In this case, the starting point I'm going to be using for this one is I'm not going to be using heavy-duty security and user accounts. What I'm going to do is simply say, when you go there, if you're not going to a specific score sheet, which will have a code associated with it, then it'll create a new score sheet and drop you right there. On the page, there will be some way via a QR code or by sending the code for the score sheet to other players for other players to quickly join that same score sheet so that they can all play. So that's my thought. A very simple startup where one set of players at one table could be playing on one and keeping track of score on one score sheet. Another set of players at another table right beside them could be playing and keeping track of their scores on a separate score sheet. Never the twain shall meet. That is a little bit of security by obscurity, which in general is not a good idea, but this is not a high security operation here. We're not trying to make sure that money doesn't move around or something like that. This is just scores for a game, so we can get by with something like that. And it would provide a good basis for a whole host of different apps. Let's say you're trying to build something where everybody who's at a conference is using it to ask questions of the speaker, or participate in a poll, or something where everybody wants to play a game together. and one whole set of people is in one game, and then right beside them, maybe another whole group is in another game. This basic framework would work for any of those. So that's the first reason I think it's useful. And then the second reason I think it's going to be useful is I'm going to use a thing called CRDT, which is, I believe, conflict-free data. It's basically data reconciliation. So if you've ever used something like Google Docs or the old Google Wave back when it existed, and I could edit and you could edit, and even if there was momentary network issues, we still ended up with the same document in the end. All the conflicts between what I did and what you did got reconciled together. I intend to use that for the numbers on this one. It's going to be a really simple use of CRDT, probably an off-the-shelf implementation, although really we'll look under the covers and you'll see that there's almost nothing to it, to keep track of the scores so that I can make a modification to somebody's score to add 5 points. You can do the same thing by mistake, and then when it overlays those both together, they only move up by 5 points, not by 10 points. Sometimes you would want it to be both of them added together. I gave them 5 points for one thing, and you forgot about the other 5 points, and you got the 5 points that I forgot about, vice versa. I don't think that's the most common case. Most of the time, it's going to just simply be, I made a change, you made a change, we both made the same change, and we really want only one to take. So you'll get a quick look at CRDTs as well. You're also going to see things like web components and maybe Redux. I'm a little bit waffly on whether I'm going to use Redux for this because there's really not that sophisticated a model behind all this. Let's get started. So I've been thinking about how to do this, and I believe that I'm going to call it ScorePad, and I'm going to call the individual things in them score sheets. So I'm going to do a get init here. All right. And let's see. I believe that, well, ultimately, I'm going to have a front end and a back end. So since I'm going to have both, I'm going to start from a minimal Express. So let's go to Express.js, and we're going to rip off their Hello World type app as a starting point. There's not a lot to that one. And we will use that in here. Let's bring up the code editor. I use VS Code, so you're going to see me use VS Code in this app. And let's see, we're going to start with a index.js. This is the minimal version of that. Okay, so now obviously we need Express installed. And so let's go ahead and bring up this, and we will say npm install Express. Okay, now I actually made a mistake there because I didn't create my package.json ahead of time, but npm has gotten a lot better than it used to be, so I can actually come in after the fact and it'll still get it right. So I can do an npm init-y. It'll create me a new npm, and you'll notice that it went ahead and stuck the Express in that it found in Node modules in as a dependency. I love that it does that. I think that's a great thing. Even if you do it after the fact, it tries to fix it up, putting something in the right spot. Okay, so this would work, and this would basically give us a minimal server, but we're going to need more than that. Really, I want there to be, let's see, I want there to be an app directory. That's where I usually put my stuff. And when I say stuff, in this case, I mean my index.html, all my JavaScript, all my CSS, everything that basically represents the front end of an app for me. So I'm going to need to, here in a minute, make sure that Express correctly serves up the static files for me. And I'm going to need to make sure that, let's see what else. I'm going to need a couple endpoints too, but I'm going to worry about that in just a second. So what I'm trying to get to is kind of a minimal first version of this, which serves up a page. I can tell you that the first version of this will probably have a lot of canned stuff in it. And the client side will, if you arrive at the page and it doesn't have a code in the URL, then it will, or if it does have a code in the URL, it will immediately go to the backend and say, is this a valid code? And try and just basically display a page for that particular score sheet. If the code is invalid or it doesn't have a code, then I'm going to have it create a new score sheet and then go to the page for that. So that's what the front end app will do to start with. And the back end needs to, at the moment, probably just serve up the static files and maybe have a couple of endpoints for the creation and for checking to see if a particular code is valid or not. So let's see here. We need the static stuff. So let's look at under Express and see how we do the static. So if you're expecting me to be an expert on this, I have, unlike in a lot of my other videos I'm going to do, I've already kind of coded it out. I've done it all before I get here. I'm not actually going to do that this time. So I am actually coding the way I really code. I have not built this in advance. I did do a little bit of research to look up at the CRDT stuff, for example, what library I might use for QR codes, things like that. But I haven't written any code yet. So this, if you're wondering why I'm so terrible at just rattling off the code, it's because I'm coding this for the first time. So we are going to use Express Static here, since that's now built in. And let's see, we need, where did I miss it? There it is, okay. So I believe we can say app.use express static, and then we need to tell it where the root is. So in this case, it's going to be ./app. That's where we want to serve up static files from. So this should get our static files as we start to create them served up. In fact, we'll test that real quick. What we'll do is I'll create a new file in here, which is an index.html. And this is not the version I'm going to go with in the end, but I will make a really crude one here. Body. Hi there. Okay, so that should get served up if we were to actually do this. And since order matters, that would actually get served up before this one would do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and change these, though. I'm going to say this is API slash score sheet ID. Whoops, colon ID. All right, so we're going to do that one. That's definitely not right, but we're going to go with it for the moment. And then we'll have an app.post score sheet. See, can I actually put any? I think I can just put anything I want in there. So let's just do that. I will put in a ID. We'll just make up a fake one for the moment. I haven't settled on the actual codes yet, but this would generate a fake code and return it. All right, so in theory, let's just see if that gives us anything. npm. No, let's not do npm. Let's do node. Actually, we'll do nodemon. Was nodemon installed? Nodemon index.js. Oops, doesn't like something I did. Oh, yep, that is right. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so it's now listening on port 3000. Let's actually see if this gets us anywhere. So we'll go to localhost 3000. Got a hi there on that. All right, so at least that's working, and it is serving up the static file because, as you'll recall, we put that into the index.html. And then let's see, API score sheet. We'll put an ID there. We've got a hello world back for that. And then if we do this one, oh, that's a get. That's right. So we would actually need to use a tool to do a post to check and make sure the post was working. We can skip that for the moment. Since the other stuff's working, there's a good chance the post is working as well. So for the moment, let's just skip that. And let's see, what do we want to do next? Let's see. I should look and see. Let's replace this faked version of this with a different faked version. We want to have it check to see if the ID is valid. And I believe, I'm trying to think how we get the IDs in Express. And the answer, I'm sure for a lot of you, are probably screaming it at your screen right now because you already know it. Let's see, basic routing is probably in here. Nope. Let's see, let's look at the routing guide then. Okay, if we have an ID in there, it probably arrives on the request somewhere. It's just request params. Okay. So if ID, we'll say it's equal to a certain string that we're going to come up with, then that's good. That's a valid one. So we'll figure out how we're going to respond to that. Else we will response.json. We'll respond with creating an all new one. Okay, so right now I've just got these little 5-digit numbers, so I'm just going to cut this back to like 5, and we'll call that realistic. It's not really. I'm just making up stuff as I go, and then I start trying to kind of. For me, this is whittling. Is what it is. It is taking shavings off of things, seeing what shape they come into, and then I will probably rewrite a lot of this as time goes by. That's a valid one, though. So let's see. So if the client receives, let's say it gets the same code back either way. It gets a JSON object back with an ID. If it's valid, then it gets the same one back. If it's not valid, it gets an all new one back. I may not like that when it actually comes into use, but we'll try it anyway. Okay, so it's 92485. So if they give us that one specific ID back, they get that one back. Otherwise, they get an all new one. If they say create, then or effectively, do a post without an ID, they get a new one. Okay, that's something. All right, so saving that automatically causes NodeMon, which I'm using to restart Node automatically. It's monitoring all of my files, and in this case, there's basically just one file. And it's saying, okay, I will now restart and show you the result. All right, let's see. So, let's see if this works. We will go in here and 92485. Okay, I got the same one back, and if I give it any other ID, oops. Yeah, so I put in this ID but got a completely different one back, indicating that that ID is no longer valid. Okay, so the client could use this to come in with a URL that contains an ID, and then turn around and make an API call to find out if it's valid or not. If it's invalid, it gets redirected to a new score sheet. Otherwise, if it comes in without an ID, it can ask for one to be created. Okay, I can build that much into my client. Let's work on the whittling on the client for a little bit. Client-wise, I use web components usually. I think web components is the future of development on the web. That's not to say that I don't believe in things like React and Angular and Vue. I just think they're going to have to change over time, because a lot of what they are doing is attempting to emulate what web components already does. If there's not really a reason why you should try and make something that pretends to create new elements when your browser is perfectly capable of creating new elements for itself. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let me create an example one here. I'm going to use, before you see me to use this, I will show you something real quick. So I have some VS Code snippets. I will put a link to this in the show notes down below this video. At the moment, this file only has two. One is for a LitElement component starter. The other one is for a Redux starter. The LitElement component starter basically, well, let's just use it. You'll see what I mean. So with VS Code, I can come in here. Let's go into the app directory and we will make a new folder, JavaScript. All right, now let's make a, I usually work this way. I have a app level component. It has things like the router in it. It goes and creates the model if it needs one right up front, and then it displays other components underneath it based on the routing that are the UI. So if there's several different pages, it handles all the routing, but it isn't necessarily doing much in the way of putting anything onto the screen. So that is the highest level component, and then it uses a whole set of other components underneath it together with a router to do all its work. That works well for me. I haven't really encountered problems with it. I've used it even for very large projects and never had any problems with it, so that's the way I'm going to build this one. So we're going to create a new file. I'm going to call that app.js, and I'll show you why I'm going to call it app.js in just a second. There is one other gist that I've got that is relevant, and I'm going to post a link to this one as well. This one is a pretty minimal webpack. I am not a guy who really loves a lot of webpack or a lot of tooling in general. I don't like a lot of tooling. I don't like to have TypeScript or Babel or other stuff. Especially in the case of Babel, it's almost pointless because all the major browsers now are evergreen browsers. They upgrade themselves automatically, and they have full support for ES6 and ES7, and probably a lot of them have ES8 stuff in there as well. There's not a lot of reason for me to transpile my code back to ES5 anymore, unless specifically I'm planning on supporting IE11, and I don't support IE11 for my side projects. I have no reason to want to. I hope that you don't support it either. I want the IE11 browser to go away, and the only way it's going to go away is if people stop supporting it. So let's look at, let me put this minimal webpack in place, and let's see here. Webpack.config.js. All right, I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so this gives me a pretty minimal webpack at this point. It's a webpack capable of, my comments on this tell you what you can do. Basically, there's three things you can do. You can either do webpack itself, or you can do the dev server, which gives you a server if you don't already have a server. We're building our own in this case. Obviously, index.js fills that role for us. We don't need that. It's really only useful if you're building something that's like a single-page app without a backend on it. The other thing that it can do is it can do, if you do webpack -- mode equals production, it'll do a minified version of your app. It will tree shake it as much as it can. It will minify it. It will do all the stuff. It'll even generate a map file so that when you're debugging, you can actually kind of see what the original code looks like. So it doesn't have a lot of lines to it. The grand total is 40 lines, and 10 of that is comments. So it's only about 30 lines long, but it does all that in that minimal amount. It does have some assumptions. As you can see, I'm expecting there to be an app directory. I'm expecting there to be an app index.template.html in there. It assumes that the output's going to be called bundle.js, and it's going to go into the app directory as well. So it's got a bunch of assumptions, but they're very simple, minimal assumptions. Sorry. All right. At this point, I could do a component if I wanted to. So let's actually come back to here, and you're going to see me use one of my snippets that I showed you earlier. I'm going to use the lit snippet. And the lit snippet basically says, I'm going to pull these items in from LitElement. If you haven't used web components before, I'll come back to that in just a second. Let me go ahead and fill in a class name for this. So we'll call it ScorePad. We'll call it ScorePad. Okay, and then let's come down here and call it app. Okay, that should do that. All right, so if you haven't used web components before, web components are pretty simple in the modern browser. They extend the HTML element, and you can put HTML into the page whenever the browser sees it. It looks basically for this name. See, here's custom elements. It looks for this name in your HTML, and then it says, okay, I'm now going to create an instance of this class and hook the two together. And that gives you a chance to render stuff out there. All LitElement does is it's middleware. It's a few K of middleware to make it easier for you to do things, certain things that would be repetitive if you just use web components by themselves without any extra code to make it easier. So you can absolutely write web components without any extra code, but LitElement just makes it a little bit easier. And I am confident that LitElement, well, we already know that it's not the only middleware that's out there. There's quite a few other choices that you can get in the way of middleware. I think as time wears on, you're going to start seeing other middleware that looks like React, middleware that looks like Angular, middleware that looks like Vue, to attract those users over to web components by giving them something that feels familiar. By feeling familiar, it will be easier for them to transition over, and they will be much happier. But they will get the higher speed that web components has, because web components are native to the browser. They're not a bunch of JavaScript trying to do the same thing. They are a feature built into the browser, running at full speed. The other thing you're going to get is, because it's built in, you're not shipping a bunch of code down to a mobile browser, for example, like the Safari on iOS or Chrome on an Android. They both have full support for web components. So why ship them 40K of React stuff, a large portion of which is unnecessary, because it's just replicating stuff that's already built into the browser. And in fact, it's inferior because it doesn't take advantage of stuff that's built into web components. Web components have things like, and you're going to see this right here, in this example one that I just stuck in there just as a placeholder, it sets every paragraph to be red. But because of the shadow DOM, which comes with web components, only paragraphs inside the element are colored red. If there were other paragraphs outside it on the page, they wouldn't have their color changed. And vice versa, if you changed all the paragraphs on the page to blue, this element, when you put it on the page, would still be red, which is exactly what you want for a component. You want to be able to define what a component looks like, drop it onto a page, and have it look like that no matter which page it goes onto. You don't want it to mess up the rest of the styling for the page when you add somebody else's component. You don't want your component to get mangled when it goes into the middle of somebody else's page. That's great stuff. And I really, and does React have that? No, they have a bunch of other stuff that you use, CSS in JavaScript and whatnot, to try and emulate that same kind of capability. It's not as good as what Shadow DOM gives you out of the box. That's why I tend to think that in the long run, and I'm going to do a video specifically on this topic, but in the long run, I believe that Vue and AngularJS and React are the new jQuery. Over time, they will just fall by the wayside. But you will get stuff that is like them, that is something you can use together with web components. All right, so enough sermonizing. That's not that interesting. Let's go, and besides, you're going to see some of it again if I ever do and I will, a web component video. So let's go to our index.html, and just for the sake of argument, let's swap this out and say we want to see ScorePad-app. There we go. So that, if we had the ScorePad added, then we would see that. So as you recall, the webpack is going to generate our index.html, and it's going to do that from a template file. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to rename this to the template file. So this is not the HTML I'm going to go forward with in the long term, but this HTML file will be turned into index.html, which is the actual one we're serving up from our app that we wrote earlier. So let's try that out. Let's actually start another terminal, and we will do something that will actually run webpack. So we'll do an npx webpack. Cross your fingers as this all works. Oh, okay, so we need to install both. So let's do that. Let's do a, we'll say yes to that. All right, that didn't work. Let's do this. npm install. You'll notice I put save dev on there because we only need it for development. It's not an actual dependency we want included with this source code, or included with the code that we're building. So hopefully, if I did this correctly, now let's try that again. npx webpack. Crush fingers. One more time. Oh, of course, we didn't install that. npm install, and you'll notice I'm not using save dev this time. I'm just going to, by default, npm install now saves to the package.json. So I'm going to say npm install LitElement. Okay, one more time. All right, we got a successful build. Let's make it do a watch. I believe it's just -watch. Okay, good. All right, so now at this point, that should be being served up. If we go look in here, okay, our webpack, you'll notice here, our webpack did what we told it to. It took this file and it used it to generate an index.html. And what's the only thing it did? It added a script line down here to the bottom, which says, here's the bundle of all the JavaScript, And here is a randomized string on the end of it that is a hash for that JavaScript. So that ensures that it doesn't get cached even after we've made changes to the code. So let's see if that actually works. We're going to go back to our local host, and we're going to go to the home page. And what should happen is the ScorePad app should tell us hello world, because that's all our current component does. Yay. And it did it, and it's red because I forgot, but I had CSS in there to make it red. Okay, so that worked. Yay. So we've got, at this point, a component, a very minimal HTML file. I'm going to want to beef this up, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that later. And let's see, what else? Okay, so I need to think for just a second. I need to start writing some stuff into the app that is a little meatier than what I've done thus far. So let's see. I need a router. I'm going to have to add a router to this. In the past, I have not done a grand survey of different JavaScript routers. And although there is a project called OpenWC, which is for open web components, which has recommendations. Let's see. I don't think they recommend a particular router. Let's just double check just out of curiosity. Do they recommend a router? Developing. Oh, they do have something. Oh, well, okay. So I can tell you that having used the routers that are out there, I hate most of these component-based routers. I am not a fan. PWA helpers router. That's interesting. I haven't looked at that one. Let's see what that's like. I may change this going down the road, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do for the moment, because I want to research this a little bit more for later. I'm going to use Navigo. That's one I've used before, router. So Navigo is a pretty simple router. It has, I don't think it is the highest number of starred routers out there. I think there is one called Director that is even higher. It's got like 4,500 stars on GitHub as a router. Thing about Director, and actually I think we can find it here. Oh, there it is. Flatiron Director. So if you look at this one, actually even higher than I said it was. It's 5,400. That's a lot of people using it. Then you look at this. Here's the thing that makes me really leery of it. If the last time anybody did anything to this was 2015, that's a long time. This is back when IE 11 got its last updates that weren't to fix a vulnerability. 4 years at this point, when I'm recording this, is too darn long for a library like this, I think, to have gone without any love if there are still issues. Now, if the issues were down in the noise level, maybe there was 10 issues or 15 issues or something like that, where people had asked for really obscure stuff or new features or whatever, then I would think nothing of that. I would think, okay, it got to stable. No, in fact, you're going to see me probably later in this project use another piece of software that isn't supported anymore. It's solid. I've used it. I like it. But I don't think it has that many issues associated with it. In this case, there's a lot of issues out there, and it hasn't gotten any love in 4 years. I don't think I want to use that. So we're going to try Navigo instead. It's seen, at a minimum, it's at least seen some work within the last 6 months. So that gives it some kind of value, and it's got a fair number of stars indicating that people are using it. I've used it in the past and been fairly happy. So let's go ahead and install Navigo. I may be jumping ahead here. Actually, I'm going to close that console because I'm not even using it. I'm using the one built into over here. let's open yet another console, and we will do an npm install Navigo. And you'll remember I said before that that's automatically saved these days, which I really love. So if we check our package, see, here's Express, LitElement, and Navigo. Very nice. I like that a lot. All right, let's see. Now then, we need to... I wonder if I can just import it. Let's see if that'll work. Import router. Actually, let's do this. Import from Navigo. I'm not getting any errors, but it's not necessarily working. Let's just see if it's going to work for us. So we're going to, let's imitate this. Obviously, I don't want to use it exactly as is, but we'll see if this will successfully create a navigator for us. Suddenly, I cannot select. There we go. All right, so in our, oh, I don't even have a constructor for this. Oh yeah, I do. Here's a constructor. So I will do a constructor here, and let's just see if this will work. They're doing it the hard way. Oh, I know. Okay, so let's see if that works. There it is. Okay, now we got it right. So that is pulling Navigo, and then we're using Navigo. All right, so we'll say this.router. Most of these should probably be constants. Okay, but for the moment I'm doing that. All right, let's just see if this passes muster. Let's look. We should see an error on the webpack one if it's not happy with that. It still looks like it's building that successfully. So that suggests that it is finding Navigo and it is working. So let's see if it works at the page level. Let's refresh this. And it doesn't work. Let's see why. Navigo is not a constructor. All right. Navigo is not a constructor. Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna crib off of some of my old code and see if that helps us at all. Let's see if I used the router in here. I may not have used it in this one. Let's see if this app has that router in it. Watch it not be one I'm using. I'm not. Darn it. All right, so let me think on this a second before I stop and go do some research. Okay. Oh, so it says I need to do it that way, not the other way. This shows an area of lacking knowledge on John's part. How to properly import things all the time with... Okay, so it's still building correctly. Let's see if it's now working in the page. And it works again. Okay, good. So I was just importing it incorrectly. That was a default export of one thing, and I should have imported it differently. I didn't get any warnings out of the build process, which I guess maybe there wasn't an opportunity for them to do that. But let's do this now. Let's add a router. Okay, and let's see. Now, per my discussion with y'all earlier, I anticipate having a route that is score sheet. Oh, let me think about that a second. That is the API I'm calling. That's not the route that I'm going to. So if I go to... okay, I know what I'm going to do. So default, if I come here, this is going to be the route where no score sheet specified. This is the one where we will get a new one. All right, let's get rid of that. And then I won't have this, but I will have something like this, which is going to be... Let's just go with that for the moment. Okay, so those two circumstances should be okay. All right, let's see what happens if I go to the page now. Not surprisingly, oh, routers. Oh, this dot router. Okay. Yes. Oh, it wouldn't be like that anyway. What am I thinking? Try again, John. So it would be like... bang. Okay, let's see if it actually is going to these. Console.log. Let's see if that gets us anywhere. All right, so let's come over here. Oops, score sheet ID. And if I come without one, no ID. All right, so the routing is working at least. So now we could work and build on this to actually make API calls. So we're going to use fetch to do that. And then maybe after I've got fetch doing a little something, we'll call it good for the day. Because I think at that point, we're going to have hit about the hour mark. Is that true? I wonder if that's true or not. But I think it's going to be a good stopping point, if nothing else. And then I can check all this in to GitHub and make it available to anybody who wants to look at it. It's not really useful yet, though. So it might be the next session after that where it actually starts to get useful and have some value. Let's look up fetch MDN. All right, so we're going to use the fetch API to make API calls. Okay. Using fetch. There we go. Thank you. I don't want to hear about fetch as a general concept. I want to actually use fetch. I don't like fetch like this. I don't like to specify a huge object with ton of stuff on it. I generally like to use fetch for a specific type of thing like fetch.get or fetch.post, and I believe it's got both of those. Let's see, fetch. Oh boy, that's a whole lot of talking. Let's see if we can find. Oh god, this is kind of crazy. Fetch, get. Let's see if this has more of the. Let's cut to the chase version of things. I thought there was a way to just say fetch.get. Am I loony? I didn't think I had to specify it all like this. Okay, maybe I am losing my mind. I thought there was a simple way to do fetch without having to specify the method, etc. Okay, that's all right. Fetch. So we're going to go to API score sheet. Actually, we want this to include the ID. So let's turn it into a templated string, and then we can use $ and supply the ID in here. Let's see. Let's see, do I have to do... This is definitely something I'm going to end up coming back to. So I'm showing my ignorance really, really broadly here at the moment, but that's okay. It's all right. I'm learning, you're learning. Or at least you're learning not to listen to me. Maybe that's all you're learning, but I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping you got some useful stuff out earlier. Let's see. We need Navigo's parameters. So, yeah, that's what I thought. Params comes in here, and so it'd be param.id. Okay, good. So in this case, this would be params.id. So now I'm making that call. Log and response. Okay. That should work. And then, oh dear. What did I do wrong? Oh, that's not valid code, John. All right, so now then there's another fetch down here that's going to be much like the other one. Only this one, I'm going to be doing it without any parameters, and I need it to know that it is a post. So let's figure out how to do that real quick. Let's see. Fetch. Okay, so that's actually tells me part of what I needed to know here. Let's look at this. because I'm really only interested in the body stuff. Whatever comes back in the body of the response. Okay, but this is still not doing it as a post, so I gotta figure that out real quick. And then we will hopefully get this working and call it good for the day, and then come back and build on this again very, very soon. Here's a post request. All right, so I just have to supply something that says what this is. Now, I don't know that I need to specify the headers in this case, because I'm not actually supplying any data. So let's just go with that. And so that becomes the second parameter to this. Well, that reminds me, I'm now realizing that my automatic formatting is not turned on. I don't like that. I like beautify. Is that what I'm looking for? Is it called beautify? I can't remember. Prettify. There we go. Prettier. I'll need to reinstall this later to where it always happens, because I like it to happen all the time, because I don't write my code very well. And I want something to automatically reformat my code every time I save it. So probably by the next time you see this, that will be happening automatically. That would have cleaned up stuff like this and made it look better. Sometimes I don't agree with the formatting that Prettier does. Sometimes I would like it maybe to be a little bit different than it does it. But the truth is, I will take something that is 100% consistent all the time over something that exactly matches what I want every time. I love having something that just automatically handles it. And that reminds me, just one other thing we can do here. Let's do this real quick. While I'm at it, I'm jumping around a lot, but let me HTML5 boilerplate. I usually use their HTML. I like it quite a lot for the basic page. Let's see. Here's the dist. And there it is. I will trim this up, but this is what I'm going to use as my starting point. Okay. I don't care for some of this other stuff, so I will get rid of some of it, but let's just go ahead and put our content back in. There we go. So my stuff is back in there. Some of this other stuff, I don't need Modernizer. I don't need jQuery. I don't need their stuff for JavaScript. I do like their inclusion of the Google Analytics from day one, and I like the fact that all this header stuff, they have put real thought into what goes in there, and I have not. So I just rip off them, like the Node.js and all this other stuff. I love this. I like it just this way, and any version of IE, they tell the user, hey, you are using an old version. That's the way it should be. All right, so let's remove that. That should still work with our stuff. I'm not going to use the rest of that project. I just use basically just that one bit. And, oh, it's complaining about some of the CSS that I am not including. I just said I wasn't going to use any of their stuff, but normalize is tempting me. Let me think about that one. Let me go ahead and create a new folder. I've got to have a CSS folder anyway, or I don't have to, but I likely will. The thing about that is, here's the one thing to think about. You can do your web components either one of two different ways. You can do your web components where they don't use shadow DOM if you want to. So that thing where they don't let outside stuff leak into them and they don't let their stuff leak outside, that's optional. There's actually just like a one-liner you can put in there that will turn that on or off. By default, it's on, but you can easily turn it off. And one reason why you sometimes want to turn it on is if you have let's say you have a framework that you're really fond of. Let's say you use Bootstrap, or you use Pure, or one of the other, Bulma. There's all these different style sheet frameworks out there. If you want to use one of those and put it up here at the top, that's not going to go into any of your components unless you turn the shadow DOM off for them. In which case, then it goes into the component and you can use it from within the component. Otherwise, you would have to include it into the component directly to be able to use it. So, for the moment, I'm going to do without the normalize and the other. Okay, let's see. Did that make an API call? It looks like it did. It did a fetch. Cool. All right, so we're going to stop right here. Probably things are not really working per se yet, but there's a lot of stuff that I have glued together. There is a web component. There is an index.html page. There is a webpack that is building everything that needs to be built. There is a Node app that is serving all the bits and pieces up to the end user. So we're going to return to this again. We're going to start actually filling in some of those endpoints to have real code behind them. Or maybe not real code. Maybe it'll still be a little bit dummied up, but it will get significantly closer to a real implementation. I'll be thinking more about how I want to do all these bits and pieces, and I will be returning to this hopefully within the week, and you will have another video of this next week. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And for gosh sakes, tell all your friends to watch as we may think. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.